Well, welcome everyone. If you'd be so kind to come in and find a seat, we'll begin. It is so good to see you all here. It's lovely outside. There's a sea of purple in the room. Can it get much better than this? Maybe. So I wanted to at least set this up a little bit for you so you understood what we're trying to do tonight or this evening, afternoon. So the university's mission statement is to empower students to think critically, act bravely, serve responsibly, and live meaningfully in a changing world. And those aren't just words, they do mean something. And if you've been around me long enough, at least enough time to get me to talk about our mission and our vision and our values, they mean a lot to me personally. I've had a great opportunity to work with pretty much everyone in this room. And 2 years ago, Eric Rentschler and I were in a small group doing a fall conference session. And if my memory is correct, that session was led by Dr. Austin and Dr. Carpenter and Dr. Griffin. And the session was about our mission statement and where we kind of saw ourselves, or what was really sticking out to us. What were the things that really energized us about our mission statement? And then the persons who put this together asked us to self-select into small groups, and we discussed it. And as we talked about it in our group, we thought all of the main pieces were great, right? First, to empower, and to empower our students, and then to think bravely. That one was almost like, oh, well, that's an obvious one, right? And we were energized by it. Some groups were really focused on acting bravely, and still others were focused on and really energized by serving responsibly. But for our group, it was living meaningfully. And I remember, I don't know exactly what Eric said, but it hit me to my core because it made me think about everything that we do day in and day out. We're interacting with people, we're making decisions. Some of those decisions are great, some of them not so great. But everything we're doing, I think, what we share is that we want to be able to live a life that is meaningful. And I think we also want to try to help our students learn how to do that. So after that little small group experience, Eric and I started talking about a whole host of things, but this was one of the things we talked about was, so how can we start to elevate living meaningfully, not just for us personally, but how can we kind of do that in our community, in our campus community? Well, we just waited for an opportunity. We did have some ideas, and when Dr. Austin announced that he would be leaving, Eric and I were talking and said, hey, is this the time? Can we start right here and start here while he's leaving? Is this a moment that we should try to capture and to really elevate what it means to live meaningfully? And we agreed. Now, it was one thing for us to agree, it was something else for Dr. Austin to agree. So the moment actually happened in this room. Dave Dwyer had brought in some assessment folks from IU, and I fired off a text message during that meeting, and Mike responded, yes, I would be willing to do it. We are so grateful. And as we kind of get ready for Mike to come up, I just wanted to read a brief bio. So Mike Austin has been the Executive Vice President for Academic Affairs and Provost for the University of Evansville since July of 2016. I remember when he came here. I remember when he interviewed. He came to UE from Newman University in Wichita, Kansas, where he also served as provost. Before entering full-time administration, Dr. Austin was a professor of English, focusing on 18th century British literature, world literature, and composition. He is the author of 10 books, including the freshman composition reader, Reading the World, Ideas That Matter. Now in its 4th edition. He has been married to Karen Austin for 27 years, and they have 2 children, Porter and Clarissa. Will you please join me in welcoming Dr. Austin?
Thank you very much, Dr. Shelby, and thank you for coming. As I understand my purpose today and the assignment I've been given, I am supposed to take the last 57 years of my life and the last 40 years of my career in higher education and roll them up into one 30-minute address of such concision and consequence that should the world be destroyed and society have to start over again with just this speech, it would form the basis of a better world. So, no pressure, no pressure. Let's go. I began my freshman year of college in the fall of 1984, after a thoroughly mediocre career in high school, during which I excelled at neither academic nor social pursuits. To my great surprise, however, I loved my first year of college and every year after that. For the first time in my life, I did well in school. I felt at home in the university among books and ideas, and among people who took books and ideas seriously. By the end of my freshman year, I knew that I never wanted to leave college, and I never did. I am now beginning my 39th year of college and my 51st grade. My job descriptions have changed a little bit, but I still feel the same way about books and ideas and people that I did in 1984. 2 books from that year stand out in my memory: Henry David Thoreau's Civil Disobedience and Oscar Wilde's The Picture of Dorian Gray. These 2 books changed my life, not because they were the best books I ever read, but because they were the first books that I read in a context where I was supposed to think deeply about them. They were the first of thousands of books that I have now read in this same context as a student, a professor, an administrator, and as a human being trying to wrench meaning and purpose out of a world that often seems to offer only entertainment and outrage. I could not imagine giving a summary lecture without talking a lot about books, so please bear with me as I flit around promiscuously from book to book and from idea to an idea in an effort to give an accounting of what I have learned so far in my life. The first book that I want to talk about is Joseph Conrad's 1900 novel, Lord Jim. This novel tells the story of a young English sailor named Jim, obviously, who does something terrible that dramatically changes his life. At first, Jim works hard and impresses his superiors, and soon secures a position as the first mate aboard the SS Patna. When the ship is damaged in a storm, Jim joins the captain and 2 other crew members as they abandon it, leaving 800 religious pilgrims to die on the open sea. When a French ship saves the Patna and tows it to shore, the crew members, including Jim, are publicly reviled for their cowardice and deprived of their certificates to sail. A split-second decision made in a moment of panic destroyed the life that Jim had imagined for himself. And that's just how the novel starts. The real story begins when Jim's plight comes to the attention of Charles Marlowe, a recurring narrator in Conrad's fiction who likes to tell stories and speculate on their existential significance. While discussing Jim's story with a friend named Stein, no first name given, Marlowe speaks one of the most significant sentences that I have ever encountered. "There is only one remedy. One thing alone can us from being ourselves cure," exclaims Stein, as he readies to tell Marlowe the one thing that will cure Jim and all of us from the evils of the human condition. But Marlowe cuts him short. and says, strictly speaking, the question is not how to get cured, but how to live. And just a little show and tell here. That is the Peter O'Toole movie of Lord Jim, which is a fine movie that I saw in graduate school at a friend's house. That's the book. This is that quotation put on a piece of pottery. And I have to tell you the story. Probably about 3 years ago now, Christy Hoschwender sent me a cryptic email that said, "What's your favorite quotation?" No context. And I said this, and a few weeks later, she made this mug, this piece of pottery with that quotation on it. And it's now one of my treasured possessions that I'm putting in boxes surrounded by lots of newspaper so that it makes the transition safely. So thank you, Christy. Conrad does not give us the answer, but he reframes the question in a way that has been crucial to my own life. It helped me understand the enormous difference between trying to get cured of something and learning how to live well. For much of my life, I have struggled with severe and occasionally incapacitating anxiety. Other people that I know and care for deeply struggle with crushing depression, addiction, eating disorders, neurodevelopmental conditions, and personal tragedies of such scope and severity that it often amazes me that anyone manages to function at all. For many years, I believed that I had to find a cure for my anxiety before I would be able to lead a happy and successful life. Conrad taught me that I was wrong. Anxiety and depression and tragedy and pain are all part of the human condition. They are cured only by embalming fluid. If we see ourselves as broken, then we will spend our lives looking for cures that don't exist. We will postpone the important question of how to live until we can answer the imaginary question of how to fix ourselves. What I learned from Conrad is that our job is to learn to live well, and we can do this with most, if not all, of our problems uncured. So, how do we live well? A lot of very smart people in human history have taken up this question. Some of the best ideas come from religious traditions. Others come from philosophers, historians, scientists, novelists, and poets. For me, the most influential single how to live statement comes from the New Testament in my own religious tradition. It is a statement that Jesus offers in response to what was almost certainly a trick question by a lawyer, who asked him, "Master, which is the great commandment in the law?" Jesus responded, "Thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thy heart and with all thy soul and with all thy mind. This is the first and great commandment, and the second is like unto it. Thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself. On these two commandments hang all of the laws and the prophets." Now, this response was not original. An original response would not have met the rhetorical requirements of the moment. The lawyer was asking Jesus to select one of 613 normative declarations found in the law of Moses and declare it the most important. This was a trick question because the Mosaic law does not rank its commandments. No single one could possibly encompass the entire law, so any answer that Jesus could have given would have been partial and open to dispute, much as it would be if somebody asked me to name the most important Shakespeare play or the best Beatles song. It's King Lear and A Day in the Life, but that's a different story. Jesus changed the assignment, but only slightly. He chose two commandments. He cited Deuteronomy 6:13 to emphasize the importance of revering God, and he selected Leviticus 19:18 to express the need to love one's neighbor as oneself. Jesus' answer works not because it gives a shocking and original Christian truth, but precisely because it does not. The answer arranges two principles that had always been part of the Jewish law, and that with some adjustments have been part of nearly every religious or ethical system ever created. First, believe in something more important than yourself and make that thing the central purpose of your life. Second, treat other people as fully human moral agents who deserve the same respect and dignity that you do. I have never encountered a better recipe for a good life. You'll notice that I am intentionally formulating these commandments more generally than they were stated in their original context. I do this because I don't want to tie the principles to any specific theology or belief system. Rather, I want to reach back and find the general principles of which these two great commandments in the New Testament are specific instances. I'm not looking for absolute truth or for the secret to success in the next life. I am supremely uninterested in any life beyond this one. I don't discount the possibility of an afterlife. I just don't think about it very much. I don't believe that heaven, however one chooses to define it, is any kind of reward for living a good life. The reward for living a good life is a good life. And everything I say today will reflect my best understanding of what a good life means. First, believe in something. This something may be a God or a specific belief system, but it doesn't have to be. All sorts of ideas and principles can become the basis of a good life. It may be a belief in human potential, or a desire to create a more just society, or a dedication to global peace, or a fierce reverence for the natural world. For the Platonic philosophers, it was the pursuit of truth, which became its own kind of beauty. For the Romantic poets, it was the pursuit of beauty, which became its own kind of truth. Any principle, idea, or value, or virtue will serve the purpose. It is important only that it be something beyond yourself, something that can overcome the powerful human impulse to make ourselves the primary focus of our own existences. This is a trap that does not lead to happiness, joy, or a good life. Two striking literary images gave me my first glimpses of the paucity of a life devoted to oneself. Both of these incorporate an afterlife as a plot mechanism to evaluate a life on this earth. It is in this sense that I offer them, and not as some kind of prescription for the next world. The first image occurs in the very beginning of Dante's Inferno. Before Dante and Virgil pass into hell, they see a group of shades whose anguished cries and incomprehensible expressions of pain cause Dante to turn to Virgil and ask what these souls could have done to deserve such torment. Virgil replies, "These are the nearly soulless, whose lives concluded neither blame nor praise. They are mixed here with that despicable corps of angels who were neither for God nor Satan, but only for themselves. The high Creator scourged them from heaven for its perfect beauty, and hell will not receive him, since the wicked might feel some glory over them." For Dante, these shades who failed to commit to anything beyond themselves during their lives are the most contemptible spirits in the afterlife. While Virgil will be happy to discourse at length about the mass murderers, traitors, seducers, and thieves that they meet in hell, he refuses to talk any more about this group, which he does not even give the dignity of a collective name or category. Dante wants us to see the smallness and insignificance of a life lived entirely for oneself. Self-absorption is not a philosophy or a principle or even a sin. It is as close as a person can come to not existing at all. Dante's tragic vision gets a comic treatment in Heinrich Ibsen's great play, Peer Gynt. Based on a trickster figure from Norwegian folklore, Ibsen's Peer Gynt is an egoist who lives by a motto that he learned from the Troll King, or the Dovremaster, depending on the translation you use. But the motto is, "Be true to yourself and to hell with the world." With this as his life's philosophy, Peer travels the world doing whatever he thinks is best for himself. In America, he becomes a slave trader. In China, he sells heathen idols to the native and Bibles to the Christian missionaries trying to convert them. When asked what a person should live for, he replies, himself. When asked what a man is, he can answer only himself. And when he finally comes to rest in an Egyptian madhouse, the inmates hail him as a wise man and crown him the emperor self. When Peer nears death, and the story here becomes quite surreal, he meets a being known as the button molder. The button molder tells Peer that to continue to exist, he must demonstrate that he stood for something in his life. If he stood for good, he will be embraced by God and admitted to heaven. If he stood for evil, he will be embraced by the devil and tormented for eternity. And if he stood for nothing at all, his soul will be melted down like a broken brass button to make the raw material for new souls. Peer Gynt will cease to exist. Peer tries to argue that he has been good simply because he was never really bad. But the button molder tells him that this is the worst life imaginable, since he will qualify for neither heaven nor hell. A thin man representing the devil comes along, and Pierre tries desperately to convince him that he was evil enough to get into hell. This is one of my favorite dialogues of all time, as Pierre tries to argue with the devil that his life had been bad enough to merit eternal punishment, only to be told that his badness, like his goodness, came from selfishness rather than commitment to any principle. Ibsen makes an argument in Peer Gynt that most people today would associate with existential philosophy. His life threatens to end with non-existence because he never lived in a way that mattered enough to qualify as an existence. He gets a reprieve in the end because one person, a woman named Solveig, still loves him even though he abused her horribly and then abandoned her. The fact that his life mattered to one other person gives him enough heft to convince the button molder, at least temporarily, that he deserves to exist. Peer Gynt is part of a very deep bench of literary characters who try to live well by focusing on themselves and end up failing spectacularly. Many of the most famous of these characters come to us in stories based on the Faust legend, including Christopher Marlowe's Dr. Faustus, Goethe's Faust, Oscar Wilde's The Picture of Dorian Gray, Thomas Mann's Dr. Faustus, it's like Dr. Faustus except with a K, and Mikhail Bulgakov's The Master and Margarita. These stories all share the same narrative arc. Somebody who really wants something approaches the devil. The something varies, but includes all of the usual suspects: knowledge, experience, talent, eternal youth, reputation, that sort of thing. In each case, the Faust character starts out with noble goals, and after achieving them, descends quickly into tawdry pleasures and pointless egoism. And the ultimate point is not that the Faust character loses his soul, but that he loses his life because he has nothing beyond himself to live for. This is why we need to believe in something. I have seen people with strong faith do amazing things with their lives. When I worked at Newman University, I spent 2 summers in Guatemala with Sister Chris Schrader and Sister Danny Brott, 2 Catholic sisters who had dedicated their lives to improving the condition of people in rural Central America. Sister Chris ran a school that educated more than 400 students through high school. Sister Danny operated a network of clinics that provided health care and prescription services to 5 rural villages. 2 nuns did all of this. They did these things because their faith propelled them to improve the lives of vulnerable people. This does not require religion. Many people do similar things for secular reasons. But in every case that I have observed, people who have this kind of purpose in their lives are happier than people who spend their lives trying to satisfy their own desires. A good life requires a good purpose for living. It requires that there be something beyond yourself that you love with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind. Find that thing. Second, be kind to other people. Shortly before his death in 1963, the novelist Aldous Huxley told the religious scholar Houston Smith the following: "It's a bit embarrassing to have been concerned with the human problem all one's life and find at the end that one has no more to offer by way of advice than try to be a little kinder." I'm not at all embarrassed to say that both my lifetime of reading and my lived experience tell me precisely the same thing. Notice that Huxley did not say be nice to other people. Nice and kind are not the same thing. We can see the difference in their etymologies. Nice comes from the Latin word nescius, which means unaware or ignorant. During the Middle Ages, it was used in English as a synonym for stupid. As it evolved to describe someone who treated other people in a friendly manner, it brought with it the notion that niceness is a sign of low intelligence, that if we really understood other people, we would not treat them well. Kind, on the other hand, is from the same word as kin. It refers to the way we treat people that we are related to. When I am kind to somebody, I proceed from the assumption that they are the same kind of person that I am. They have the same worth that I do, want the same sorts of things that I do, and deserve the dignity and respect that I think I deserve. Whereas someone can be nice with their words, kindness requires action and meaningful engagement with other people on the same terms that I want others to engage meaningfully with me. Niceness is barely even a value. Kindness is essential to a good life. As its etymology suggests, kindness is not a set of behaviors as much as it is an initial fundamental assumption about another person, the assumption that they are like me. Kindness is an integral part of human nature, but so is unkindness. We are genetically and culturally predisposed to treat certain people the way that we treat ourselves, our friends, members of our family, people in our tribe, people who agree with our political stances, people who like our posts on social media, people who are like us in some way that we imagine to be important. But our tribal nature makes it difficult for us to consider everybody this way. In-groups presume out-groups, and us presumes them. Human history is full of people treating other people as less than fully human, as different in kind, and therefore undeserving of kindness. This, I think, is why nearly every religious or philosophical system ever created has tried to expand our circle of kindness, to increase the number of people that we see as the same kind of people that we are. Most religions, and this chart here comes from a book by my very good friend Peggy Fletcher Stack, who is the religion reporter at the Salt Lake Tribune in the state I will soon be becoming a resident of. And she wrote a children's book called A World of Faith, which has this chart in it, and she talks about all of these different religions. Most religions contain a normative statement similar to what Christians call the Golden Rule. Act towards other people the way that you want other people to act towards you. The formulation assumes that we don't need a list of rules and principles detailing how to treat other people. We know intuitively what good treatment looks like, because we know when we have experienced it. We already know how to treat people who matter. We just have to understand that everybody matters. This principle is a core belief of Christians, Jews, Confucians, Buddhists, Muslims, Zoroastrians, Kantians, Aristotelians, Rawlsians, Wiccans, Rastafarians, Pastafarians, secular humanists, humane secularists, Masons, Rotarians, and just about everybody else. We need these constant reminders because we are spectacularly bad at putting this universal human advice into practice. My best tutor in the art of kindness has been the great Russian novelist Leo Tolstoy. After writing several hugely successful works such as War and Peace and Anna Karenina, Tolstoy experienced a spiritual crisis and a profound conversion to a philosophy that he called Christian anarchism. This philosophy rejected both the existence of an afterlife and the divinity of Jesus Christ, but it did acknowledge Jesus as the world's supreme moral teacher and the Sermon on the Mount as the best basis for a meaningful life. To the dismay of his family, Tolstoy renounced royalties on all of his previous works, and he began to write a different kind of literature designed to illustrate his newfound beliefs. For me, the greatest of Tolstoy's works is a short story that he wrote in 1895 called Master and Man. The principal character of Master and Man is Vasily Andreevich Breknikov, a landowner and merchant in late Tsarist Russia. As the story begins, Vasily is trying to cheat his neighbor out of the timber on his property by offering a price several times lower than he intends to sell that timber for. He knows that he needs to get there first, cash in hand, to prevent someone else from grabbing the goods. The man is his servant Nikita, who agrees to accompany him on what is supposed to be a short ride in a horse-drawn carriage. Things, of course, go drastically awry. In this case, the drastic awryness comes in the form of a blinding blizzard that makes their journey treacherous. They come to the house of another friend who begs them to stay until the morning when they can travel safely, but Vasily can think only of being the first one to his neighbor's house. So he loads up the horse and departs with Nikita, saying only that this is business and nothing can be done. The awryness becomes even more drastic, and eventually the road disappears underneath the snow. The horse can no longer pull the sled, and they stop in a ditch on the side of the road where they decide to try to stay the night and weather the storm. Nikita has no interest in going on, but Vasily, still thinking of the profit he will make if he's the one to buy the timber, decides to set out on horseback, leaving Nikita to die. It's all the same to him whether he lives or dies, Vasily reasons. What is his life worth? He won't grudge his life, but I have something to live for, thank God. He means, of course, making money. But Vasily comes back and has a fundamental change of heart, representing Tolstoy's own conversion several years earlier. He sees Nikita on the ground, in the snow, freezing to death, and he decides to save his servant's life by covering him with his own body. And I'm going to read a fairly long passage here, 3 whole slides worth, that represent the last moments of Vasily's life after he makes this decision to cover his servant and give his own body for his servant's life. He remembered that Nikita was lying under him and that he had got warm and was alive, and it seemed to him that he was Nikita and Nikita was he, and that his life was not in himself but in Nikita. He strained his ears and heard Nikita breathing and even slightly snoring. Nikita is alive, so I too am alive, he said to himself triumphantly. And he remembered his money, his shop, his house, the buying and selling and Mirnov's millions, and it was hard for him to understand why that man called Vasily Breknikov had troubled himself with all those things with which he had been troubled. Well, it was because he did not know what the real thing was, he thought, concerning that Vasily Breknikov. He did not know, but now I know, and I know for sure. Now I know. And again, he heard the voice of the one who had called him before. In a dream, he heard a voice calling him. I'm coming, coming, he responded gladly, and his whole being was filled with joyful emotion. He felt himself free, and that nothing could hold him back any longer. After that, Vasily Andreevich neither saw, heard, nor felt anything more in this world. The great revelation of Master and Man is not that Vasily sacrifices himself in a noble gesture to save his servant. Vasily does not, in fact, sacrifice his own life. Rather, he creates it. As Tolstoy presents it, the entire meaningful life that Breknikov lives occurs during the few moments between his decision to save Nikita and his death. His joy, and indeed his life, come only after he recognizes the full humanity of his servant and the triviality of almost everything that he had lived for in the past. His final act of kindness becomes inevitable once he recognizes Nikita's moral worth. The point of the story is not that Vasily dies, but that he lives, however briefly, a good life. Conclusion. It does not take much sophisticated analysis to understand that these two principles, belief in something beyond yourself and kindness to people other than yourself, are really just different ways to say the same thing. A life lived solely for oneself is not a good life. Selves are too small, too limited, and too isolated to be the basis of happiness, integrity, satisfaction, or a meaningful life. Such a statement, I realize, flies in the face of our evolutionary programming, which operates on the principles of genetic self-interest. According to the iron logic of natural selection, organisms that prioritize their own survival and the survival of their genes are rewarded with increased representation in the future. We are descended from millions of generations of organisms who focused on their own survival and reproduction. Caring about anything else, it seems, goes against our basic biological instincts. But here's the problem. Neither our basic biological instincts nor the iron logic of natural selection cares whether or not we're happy. They only care that we survive long enough to reproduce and that we provide our offspring with the resources that they need to reproduce again. Anxious, perpetually dissatisfied creatures do quite well in the evolutionary sweepstakes. Their constant anxiety causes them to avoid possible threats and keeps them alive long enough to reproduce. And their constant desire for more than they have secures greater resources for their posterity. The desire to live a contented, meaningful, anxiety-free life has very little selection value, so it rarely survives in a population long enough to become an instinct. And yet, this process of natural selection built many of the characteristics and behaviors that we call human nature. In his Leviathan, Thomas Hobbes famously describes the natural state of human life as solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short, which is my rock band name. Someday, that's what I want my metal band to be called. But solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short is a pretty good description of a bunch of people living only for themselves and their own self-interest. We have it in our power to decide to live differently, more intentionally, more thoughtfully, and with more kindness. If enough people would do this, our collected actions would produce a better world. But even if only a few people choose to live this way, these few will have a better life. This is true, I believe, because it is only possible for us to live well when we have things to live for. Before I close, let's go back to Lord Jim. How does Jim live? With Marlowe's help, Jim secures a position with Stein as a trade representative in an obscure corner of Indonesia, the fictional island of Patusan. The island itself is a near Hobbesian state of nature. Its people are caught between warring chiefs and a ruthless bandit named Sharif Ali. Jim inserts himself into the life of his new home and leads a group of islanders in a battle against Ali. The people defeat the bandit and Jim becomes the hero. The islanders give him the name Tuan Jim, or Lord Jim, and treat him as both a lawgiver and a peacemaker. Jim brings further peace to the island by appointing a new chief, and he falls in love with a beautiful young woman named Jewel, whom he promises not to ever leave. More problems arise, another bandit arrives on the scene, and after a long series of battles, which I will not describe here, Jim once again faces a situation where he must either flee or face a certain death. Having found a purpose in his life and a people who mean more to him than himself, Jim refuses to run and calmly faces his own death. Like Vasily Brekhnukov, Jim finds something that he is willing to die for. And in doing so, he demonstrates that he has found something worth living for. Now, Conrad's particular answer to the question, how should we live, is not one that we will be able to reproduce. Whatever advantages might accrue to being a near-divine figure on a Pacific island and sacrificing oneself in a grand gesture of reconciliation, it is not a career path open to most people today. Conrad's general answer to the question, however, is the course that we can all pursue. It is the same two-step program advocated by Jesus, Confucius, Muhammad, the Buddha, and thousands of other philosophers and religious leaders in world history. Step 1, find a purpose beyond yourself worth devoting your life to. Step 2, recognize the fundamental humanity of all other people and treat them accordingly. This may or may not be the best way to live well in the next life. But everything I have read, seen, and experienced in the 57 years of my life convinces me that this is the way to live well now. Thank you for 7 wonderful years at the University of Evansville. I will miss you all.
Well, thanks, everyone. Thank you for coming and taking your seat again. We are having a reception for Mike out in the Class of 59 gallery. I hope you'll be able to stop by and pick up a few things to taste and to talk to Dr. Austin and wish him well. Thank you so much for being here, and have a good weekend.